Afternoon. My name is Gwen Fernandez. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Pacific representative for the Museum Education Division's Development Committee. And I'm really pleased to welcome you all to today's Peer-to-Peer. So just as by brief introduction, Peer-to-Peer is a program that the Education Division offers to create informal conversations and spaces for museum educators to share practices, to share lessons, to ask questions, to imagine together. The series has been ongoing for many years, and you can find recordings of past programs on our YouTube page. As Kabir was saying earlier, we are recording today's program. So please do, you're welcome to turn on your screen, but also if you want to keep your screen off. This is meant to be an informal conversation, so we really want you to participate as you are comfortable and as you are able. We will have the chat available for questions as we go along today, and our moderators for today's program will also share other information as we get started. Just another note, it seems like everybody's doing a great job right now, but just as a reminder, Zoom, please do mute yourself if it's not, if you're not speaking. That will just help us keep things clear. I totally forgot to provide a visual description of myself. So again, my name's Gwen. I am one of the NAEA reps. I have long brown and gray hair. I'm a white cisgendered woman wearing a blue denim shirt. And I have dangly earrings, hoop earrings on today. I'm coming to you from my home in Phoenix on the ancestral lands of the Holcomb and Akimel O'odham peoples. And I'm in my guest bedroom with white walls and a brick wall behind me and lots of plants, always. So I have one quick update or one quick piece of business on behalf of NAEA before I'll toss things over to Hallie and Kabir to get us started today. So we are currently looking for new folks to join the NAEA Museum Education Development Committee as part of our regional representative elects. So these folks serve a 2-year term in their elect position before then moving on to the board as a regional representative. So we have the Southeastern, we have the Western, Pacific regions representing the entire country. So I will drop a link in the chat for a form to fill out if you're interested in learning more. I'll also put my email there, and you are most welcome to email me and ask me any questions about what this role entails. So with that, I want to toss it over to Hallie Scott and Kabir Singh, part of our Viewfinder team, to introduce today's program.
Great. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see you all. I'm Hallie Scott. I'm one of the co-editors of Viewfinder. My description is I am a white woman with curly brown hair and big brown glasses on, and I have a black cardigan, and I am pretending to be in the museum where I work, the Hammer Museum. So I have a kind of brightly colored splotchy stairwell behind me that is a past exhibition at the museum. And I'll pass things over to Kabir.
So hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be with you all today. I'm Kabir Singh. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm currently the editor-in-chief of Viewfinder and will be rotating off in summer. And I am a brown-skinned man with short black hair and have a spider plant behind me, and I'm wearing a denim shirt and a navy cardigan, sort of a combination of Gwen and Hallie's outfits. We're all similarly dressed. And I am joining you today from the traditional lands of the Tongva people in Los Angeles County. And I work for the organization Visual Thinking Strategies as the manager of online learning. So excited to be with you today. Shall we provide some context for Viewfinder, and then we'll invite our panelists to introduce themselves as well. So Viewfinder is, oh, go ahead. Hallie? Or
I was just going to say, we also want to hear who you all are. So maybe in the chat, you could share where you're here from, your pronouns, and most of you have your names in your participant screens, but if not, your name as well.
awesome. Yeah, excited. Thank you all so much for being here. So Viewfinder is part of the NAEA Museum Education Division. It is the online journal that is devoted to the intersection of museum education work and social justice, and has been as a journal in existence for 6 years, and for the last 4 years has been focused on this intersection. And so we've invited the panel of, we have a panel of current and former authors who will be speaking about their work and inviting folks to be in discussion also about work. And so I'll pass to Hallie to provide a little more context for this upcoming issue and what we're going to do in our time together.
Thanks. So our upcoming issue is our 13th issue of Viewfinder. And for that issue, we wanted to focus on the topic of change as a way to reflect on the past year and both the COVID-19 pandemic and the pandemic of systemic racism. We have been looking back at how much the discourse of change has kind of dominated our field in the past year. All of the calls for institutional reckoning, the uprisings in support of Black lives, the activism of Change the Museum and other social media initiatives, and then also the kind of countless proclamations and promises made by museums in response to those calls. So we kind of wanted to start the issue with the question of what has actually changed. And the authors in the issue, some of whom are here with us today, are really focused on this complicated question of real measurable change on both a personal and an institutional level. And that issue will be published in the next couple of weeks. So this is kind of a preview of some of what's included. But for this peer-to-peer, we also wanted to gather some of the contributors from the past issue. So we have a mix of people who are writing an upcoming issue and people from past issues, so that we can kind of gather and talk about how to reflect on change, these questions of change, and also how to write about it, how we have written about it. So we'll have our panelists introduce themselves, and then we have a few opening questions that we will ask to kind of start things going, and then we'll open it up for questions and conversation. So first, I'd love to just invite each of the panelists, or actually I'll pass it back to Kabir to frame our first question for the panelists.
Thanks so much. And this is the first time Hallie and I are co-presenting or co-teaching together. So it's just fun getting to do that. So as panelists, as you introduce yourselves, would you also please summarize your topic that you wrote about or are writing about in your Viewfinder article, and along with your introduction. So let's see, I'll call on Bernardo. I'm seeing you first on my screen, so I'm going to call on you to introduce yourself first, please.
Thanks, Kabir. Hi, everyone. My name is Bernardo Velez-Rico. I use he, him pronouns. I am a mestizo man with light brown skin, joining from my apartment where I have many, many plants behind me. They keep me company and bring me joy. I manage school outreach programs at the Dallas Museum of Art, which is located in Dallas, Texas, on occupied Wichita and Caddo land. So I think, wrote the longest ago for Viewfinder. I was part of the 9th issue of Viewfinder, which was on language. And in it, I wrote about kind of my approach as I was thinking about what it looks like to program for linguistically diverse communities and do that in an inclusive and authentic way. I was thinking specifically about programming for Spanish-speaking audiences, which is our largest demographic here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. It was called Traducción sin Inclusión, when inclusion gets lost in translation, and was really thinking about how a lot of the approaches that I was seeing both at my museum and others in terms of trying to be inclusive of linguistically diverse communities was really rooted in deficit thinking and in translational practices that did not actually afford shared authority to those communities that they were trying to include. So I kind of wrote about my my trials and errors as I tried to be more linguistically inclusive with the students that I work with. We have a huge English learner population in Dallas. And so I kind of wrote about, yeah, my work there, which has evolved and grown a lot since then. But yeah, I'm happy to be here with y'all.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Bernardo. Joe and Jason, would you both like to go next?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Joe McEntee, she, her, hers. I am a museum educator and teaching artist at the Smart Museum of Art. I am a medium brown skin woman, American woman of African descent. I am currently wearing overalls, black overalls, and a black and gray turtleneck sweater. I am sitting in my basement with some of my books and art behind me. And this is located in a townhouse, which is on traditional Potawatomi land. The upcoming article that I contributed to for Viewfinder is about change. And the particular piece that I authored has to do with the change that me and my students have undergone since the pandemic and how it's affected the practice, both in the museum and in the classroom. So with that, I will kick it over to Jason.
I mean, you know, I can just listen to you talk forever, Joe. So thank you. Hi, I'm Jason Pallas. I'm very excited to be here with you all. I use he, him. I am the manager of community engagement, arts learning at the Smart Museum, and have the great pleasure of working with Joe, among other fantastic team as well. I am here in my new apartment. We just moved to this weekend in the Hyde Park neighborhood of Chicago. So this is, you'll see plants behind me. And then if I were to tilt, you would see a mound of boxes. So I will keep it right here on a very handsome man with bald, with a nice coiffed beard and a checked shirt on, pink and gray. This is the ancestral lands of the Council of the Three Fires. And before I forget, I just want to share about our article, which I co-authored with Joe, that it was actually authored by 7 people. So you'll see, I think it's longer than we were asked for. So apologies to the Viewfinder editors for all of the, I think they put in 3 times the amount of work that they were bargaining for when they allowed us to come on. But I say that to say that it was a multi-authored article, and that one of our other authors, whether she wants to be called into the space or not, I'm calling her in. Myra Palafox is with us here as well. That's just to say that when we get to a more open conversation, you'll have yet another perspective on our article. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Joe and Jason. And then I will now pass to Alyssa.
All right. Hi, everyone. So Gwen and I are here on behalf of Museum Workers Speak. So I am a cisgender white woman. I use she, her pronouns. I have long curly brown hair, a yellow blazer, also like Hallie, a splotchy art background, and I have earrings that say solidarity in script on them. I'm reporting in from Toledo, Ohio, which is the ancestral land of the Kickapoo, Fox, Peoria, Kaskawika, Potawatomi, and Miami peoples. and I am a recovering museum educator. NAEA, the museum community here, has been a really nurturing space for me in the museum education time of my life, and I see some really cherished faces here, so it's a joy to be back in this space. So thank you all for having me. So the article that Gwen and I and several others co-authored is called Mutual Aid and Organizing for Museum Workers in Crisis. And so it was co-written by Museum Workers Speak members Anissa Antar, Gwen Fernandez, Hannah Heller, and Kate Swisher. And so as our organization, Museum Workers Speak, we established a relief fund in April, a year ago now almost, that has raised over $100,000 to support museum workers who've been impacted by COVID-19. And, you know, as we all know, as museum workers and museum educators specifically, museum educators are the ones that typically shoulder the burden and the expectation of providing the social value for museums. So we're very used to, you know, that expectation placed upon us. And you know, it makes sense in that way that museum educators were many of the folks that created this relief fund that stepped up to do this work. And museum educators, you know, were the most represented group of people who were applicants to the relief fund. The 30% of the applicants were museum educators, which shows how much museum educators were impacted by COVID-19 and by the, you know, devastating wave of furloughs and pay cuts and other ways that museum educators and museum workers in general have been impacted. And, you know, because we're practicing museum educators, we have less space in our job descriptions than our curatorial counterparts might to do the work of documenting our work and our praxis. And as someone who did my doctoral work on museum education, I just want to say that thank you all for contributing to Viewfinder, because you know, the grad students 30 and 50 years down the line will thank you for writing for Viewfinder.
And I'll just unmute to say I have two hats I'm wearing today. So one is a host with my NAEA duties, but also as a Museum Workers Speak organizer and co-author of this article. But Alyssa said everything else that needed to be said.
Thank you all so much for introducing yourself and sharing about your contributions to Viewfinder. We wanted to ask a follow-up question that's kind of delves into the writing process. So we're curious about what role did the writing process play for you in terms of how you're thinking about change in the field or in your institution? And did writing for Viewfinder help create any actual change in your field or institution? And anybody who feels ready can jump in to take a stab at answering this one.
I'll be brave, I'll jump in. As a writer, as well as a visual artist, I gather my thoughts in my journaling. And this helped to sort of put, I guess, in perspective, all the things that I was feeling about what I was experiencing. So in that respect, it was very cleansing. It felt good to share what I was feeling and thinking about the changes that I was experiencing.
That's great to hear. Thanks, Joe. Anybody else want to share?
Yeah, I think for me, it was quite impactful. I mean, I wrote the article. I was very unsure. I mean, even when I wrote the proposal, I was very on the edge about whether I felt ready to write about the work that I was doing. It was in my first year at the DMA. And then my position at the DMA was my first full-time permanent position in a museum. Prior, I'd had internships. And so I was like, I don't know that I feel ready, but I knew that and in some way I had the feeling that like what I was doing, there weren't like necessarily resources on it. So I was like, I want this writing process to also help me in really figuring out what it is that I'm doing and how it connects to other scholarships. So for me, it was a really great opportunity to connect with museum studies, but also to connect with all of these other disciplines that I felt were not necessarily being, cited or referenced in work that I was reading, or presentations that I had seen in museum education. So for me, it was a really great kind of thinking process. It really helped me solidify and kind of be more firm in what I believed I was doing through the work and what was missing from the work. And I do think it also then led to change at our museum. I was doing this work at a time when our museum had a strategic plan that included a charge from our director to become a bilingual institution. And so as part of the plan, as part of that strategic plan, we had a strategic initiative committee that was focused around this bilingual initiative. And I was part of that. And I think writing this article and then seeing it published also kind of afforded my voice a bit more authority than I felt that I had as a relatively young professional, and in that committee especially. So it actually, I do think, shifted the direction of our institution's work, because our bilingual initiative committee was very centered around just translating things into Spanish. So that is where all of our resources were going, was, wall text, cafe materials, all of these different things, and just translating them into Spanish. And I think in reading my article, a lot of people then also kind of contributed that to the conversation in the committee, where we were like, we're not really being critical enough of what it means to be inclusive of Spanish speakers. And it really changed the direction that committee had been going in for months. So I do think there was change there.
That's really exciting to hear. Yeah, Gwen.
Sorry. Yeah, this is Gwen. Bernardo, I didn't share this in our planning session, but your article actually had impact on me and my practice and my museum. So I was part of our bilingual initiative at my former employer at Phoenix Art Museum. And like you, also had an experience where we were really focused on translating wall text. And so I was really working to advocate on thinking much broader about what it meant to be linguistically inclusive. And so your article was really helpful in me shaping my thoughts in our work at my museum. So just want to say thank you. Yeah, go ahead if you wanted to say something.
No, I was just gonna say thank you. That's really sweet of you to share.
So in terms of the writing with Museum Workers Speak, and Alyssa, I'll let you jump in as well. I think for me, one thing that it afforded for me personally as a new organizer with Museum Workers Speak, the organization's been around since 2014, 2015. It was a chance for me to really collaborate with folks who've been part of it for all those years, and to really get a grounding in some of the history and the thinking. And my particular role was in looking at our data. And it was, writing this article was a real push for us to look into the applications that we had received to that point, and to really push ourselves to kind of come to some understandings about what that data was telling us about this moment in time and this particular applicant pool. So I think that was just really helpful in us being able to articulate and share out with the field what we were seeing internally as we were going through and reading all of these testimonies from museum workers who have been laid off and furloughed. And I would say, in terms of impact on change, I think we've seen since Museum Workers Speak launched the fund back in May of 2020, April 2020, we've seen so many more funds pop up. We're seeing them come up in many different museums, and we've had many folks say that they've been inspired by that. So I think getting to be able to publish and share this has helped spur this kind of activism in other sectors.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think I kind of jumped the gun and answered that in my introduction, but, it really was important for us to, this was such an emergent thing. We didn't have a strategic plan that resulted in a relief fund, right? Like, we came up with the relief fund because there was such a, dire and sudden and urgent need for it, right? And so we're doing all of this action to be responsive, to be timely, to just get those resources out there as quickly as possible. And so to really have an opportunity like this, to step back, to reflect, to get all of these things that are these emergence ideas out there onto the written word, that was a huge opportunity that really helped clarify our thinking. And again, for all those grad students in the future, like Hallie, I know you feel me, like it is so important to get this stuff out on paper, for it to be part of the record so that it doesn't just slip out of our fingers.
Yeah, I'll follow up on that just to say, I think that we definitely kept the grad students of 50 years from now in mind when we were writing our article. And no, I'm just kidding. But I recognize that is like really important. I think that's a funny point. For us, I think the main things that were super important for us and impactful was the opportunity, since there was 7 of us as the museum educators, to just see and debate and sort of flesh it out with one another, right? And sort of that can happen in writing in a different way than can happen in a Zoom meeting or however else it might happen, right? And it would happen through like specific little sparks that then would sort of be like, oh, what does that mean? Like linguistic things would be a portal to like a big philosophical discussion. That's like, we need to figure this out, because we all say that we are the avatars and agents of sort of idea work happening at the museum, but we're not all pushing at the same time in the same direction, right? So sort of saying like, okay, what are those common spaces? And the writing really forced us to grapple with that. And then I think a secondary sort of like upshot or impact of it is the, I don't know what you want to call it, like the credential or the bona fide, or like just how the rest of the museum staff now sees us. We were talking yesterday, we had a meeting with ourselves that was very long, as they all are, but we always feel very like sort of patronized or condescended to, or sort of separate, and like, oh, isn't that cute that you all do the school-based work with the kids? And that the real sort of like hefty academic work happens in the curatorial department, which it does, and that's no shade on that, but to say that we are professionals in a very real sense, and we think and consider and can like contribute something to the field, I think is really important for us to share with the rest of our staff, just to have a better seat at the table, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you so much all for sharing. So I'm just going to pose one more question to the panel before we open up for wider discussion. And that's, what calls for change are you still making or advocating for right now in your work? And I think anyone should feel free to jump in.
Oh my gosh, I mean, what change aren't we calling for, right? Like, we're such an expansive question, right? Like, I think, one thing that we're really calling for is that, we're not going to wait around for our institutions to come save us. You know what I mean? Like, you and I, like all of the museum educators, all the museum workers out there, all the recovering museum workers out there, like we are our mutuals. Like, we are the ones that we've been waiting for, right? Like, we need to step up and care for one another and not wait for our institutions to do that. Like, that's really what this mutual aid fund is about for us. And that, is the message behind our article.
Yeah, just to build on that, just to continue to advocate for collective action, and to realize that, I think especially in these times, like, we can feel really isolated, right? We can feel isolated within our institutions. If we've been separated from our institutions, we can feel isolated from the community. And what we hope in this work is just a remembrance and a space to come together and to recognize that we really can make a profound change if we work collectively.
Yeah, and one thing, as a recovering museum worker that really, stands out to me about museum workers is, once you're a museum worker, you're always a museum worker. Like, I stepped out of this field into, another part of the arts world. I'm in the performing arts now. And I'm still a part of this space, even though I don't really necessarily see myself working in museums again, right? Like there is just such a profound like connection within this field, and that, that relationship is something that we can really build upon. And it's been so exciting to see, museum mutual aid funds for specific museums or specific cities pop up. And, one of our goals for this year really is to support those organizations. If you are thinking about starting a mutual aid fund, like please connect with us. We really want to, build that relationship. We really want to be a grandparent for other museum mutual aid funds. And of course, it's so exciting to see all of the museum unions popping up. Like this is a time for museum workers to build collective action. It's so exciting. The momentum is just fabulous. So just keep up the good work. I know some of you on this very call are doing some of that incredible work, and I'm so proud of you and so excited. And just please, like, let us be a resource to you, and like let's all be a resource to each other, and we can all lift ourselves up together.
Yeah, this is a big question. Also, thanks for those comments in the chat. I look, so much still needs to change. I think a couple of things that come to mind specifically. One, I think about like where our institution has capacity, has like multilingual capacity, and in terms of like, well, one, it exists in our programming in our education department, but so I think there's still a lot of room for growth in our other departments, but also even within education, where our efforts are concentrated and where our staff capacity and volunteer capacity is concentrated. It's all in outreach and community programming. We have our outreach. I manage our school outreach programs, and those are taking place out in schools, and those are offered bilingually. Our community programs have bilingual staff and capacity, but things that are happening on site have very little capacity. Well, obviously right now, COVID different, but like in terms of like our on-site regular programming, like our docents, very much monolingual, very much white, and the demographic that we're used to seeing for docents. And so I think a lot of times like bilingual or multilingual efforts get compartmentalized, and they're not really woven into the fabric of the institution. And also, I've been thinking about how during the pandemic, with all of our efforts to do things virtually and reach people in new ways, I really feel like it's wild to think, all the time that's passed and the ways in which all the time that we've had really to introduce things. And in a way, I'm like disappointed looking back at the ways in which we really didn't make the most of the opportunity that we had to reach more people in new and authentic ways. I'm even thinking about sure, we can make things available in other languages online, but I'm thinking about all of the ways, we go to sessions where we're like, how do we make this virtual programming feel more like an exchange? Like, in what ways are we inviting people to, send things to us, contribute to us, and then those things were still very much centering English speakers. I'm like that, like, who do we receive material from? Like, who do we not solely like create outputs for, but create opportunities to receive input from? And then do we have the staff capacity, especially with who's been taking charge with certain digital efforts, to receive that input? And I don't think we do quite yet. So I think there is a lot of room for change there. And obviously, I think there are a lot of other places where change needs to happen outside of just thinking about language, but I'll stick to that for now.
I would say for us, there's two things. One is really specific, which is that we are in an interim director position. So we're searching for a full-time sort of leader and being very active in what types of questions and concerns should the hiring committee lob at the applicants, and how wide of and diverse of a pool can we get for that applicant? So that's really something that we are trying to hold everyone's feet to the fire there, so that they can't sort of just drag the process out and then say, oh, well, we forgot about that aspect, that we're really sort of on them about it until that person's named, and hopefully the whole staff can rally behind that choice. And then I think the other one is sort of pedagogically or philosophically sort of allowing us to rethink what education means and how we sort of engage with it, that it's not, I don't know, like, what are our metrics? What's our assessment? What's our evaluation? That it's, I don't know, that we don't have to care that students do X, Y, or Z that we might have felt the need to do before. And I'll let Jo sort of talk more about what she does with her students. But I mean, they start off the class with just a Ask Miss Jo, which really sometimes has to do with art, but also it's like, how does a computer work? Or why is the sky blue? Or like whatever is on a third grader's mind, which I think as a facilitator, as an educator, could feel like, well, that maybe that's separate reason I'm here in your classroom, but in this moment is so necessary and part and parcel. And when we think about what do students need right now, is they need that space and they need that adult and they need that mentorship and that care. And just thinking about, okay, maybe that's what we're offering, right? And if that comes through art, groovy, and if not, so be it. I think that that's a big thing that we can advocate for, is sort of like, I think people have a limited sort of box of what museum education should or could do. And we can really, this is a moment to explode that and help change some of that. But I don't want to speak for you, Jo. I know there's lots of other things that you all have going on too.
That's true. Thank you, Jason. What we do in the classroom is not just teach the children how to make a perfect portrait. It's how to use skills that they can carry over into other areas. And not just the fact that a circle is a geometric object or an oval and how to make them correctly, but what to do if you make a mistake, and realizing that you have the power to change that. You don't have to accept it just because, okay, I need a new piece of paper. I need new this, I need new that. You can build on your mistakes. And if you don't make mistakes, then you're not really learning. You have to make those mistakes, and giving them the space to realize that and to be okay with that and to know that they can go on. That kind of empowerment is what we're teaching in the classrooms, aside from, the basics of art. Okay, this is how we do a landscape, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. Personally, today we were working on portraits, and as usual, the younger children, the kindergartners, they're much more into being open. But by the time they get to second grade, they're like, oh my gosh, does it look like my classmates? Is it okay? What do I do? What do I do? And I don't have paper. And then they show me all this other stuff. And I said, well, as an artist, I draw on everything. I mean, if it doesn't move, I draw on it. So if I have a piece of paper or a napkin or a book, I will take a page and I will draw. And so one of the little girls, she found a coloring book, and the inside cover, of course, was blank. And she says, I can use this. And I said, yes. She said, but I don't know how to draw my face. I said, just feel. What shape is your face? How does your nose feel? And she drew a picture. Wasn't a perfect picture. And had I not known it was her by the little top knot she put up there for her hair, I would have said, not quite sure who this is a portrait of, but she did a portrait, and it was very, very good. She also gave herself pink hair. Not sure if that was because that was the only color she had or because it was her favorite, but it was okay. And I think that made the portrait. And I'm sure Myra will agree with me that what we're trying to teach them is to embrace their individuality, to be confident in that. And if our art and our teaching art can be that catalyst, that is a big win for us. Myra, I know you're there. Do you want to jump in?
Sorry, she's on the bus at the moment.
Okay.
So it might be hard for her to participate, but she is talking in the chat and she says, well said, Jo. So I think that's a +1 for Myra. Yeah.
Okay. No problem, Myra. That's basically the way we handle, teaching in the classrooms. It's been difficult for us because we have this idea of we need to get these points across, we need to get these materials to them. But one of the best times we had was over the Christmas break, collecting stuff for our own personal art kits. So there were no limits. Anything that you thought you could use to create art was what we brought back after the holidays to build our art kits and to make our own individual art. So it wasn't like you have to have a pencil, you have to have this, you have to have that.
Thanks so much, Joe, and everyone for sharing. Joe, I wish you could lead us in an art making activity right now. That would be really wonderful if we had a little more time. Thanks all of you for sharing. We know that's a tough question to answer, but it's so exciting to hear what you're all still thinking about and advocating for. We want to take some time to open it up to questions from everybody else. So if anybody wants to jump in, and you could raise your hand digitally and unmute yourself and ask a question, or you could pose questions in the chat as well. And then oh, here's a question. A promotion. Is there a link for that, Jason?
Not yet. Sorry, we're working on it.
So I was going to say, if there aren't questions, we're also really curious. Oh, I see a question from Julene. Ooh, an even bigger question. So Julene's question is, what are the top 2 or 3 things that you want to see change in museums? Is this a question just for the authors, or can anybody jump in and answer? Anybody? Because I'm curious to hear from everybody else who's here too. Anybody want to answer that?
Oh, I got a big answer though. One of the things that I have always had, it's a problem. It's image. And particularly with the way African Americans are portrayed in museums. There seems to be a disconnect where historically there have been images that have been very negative, and then they had to go super positive, and then they had to be idealistic. And with each one of these phases, there's always someone who's left out. If you were poor and did not fit in the NAACP approved image of what was hanging in a museum, then you felt isolated and discounted. If you were I guess that would have been in the late 1800s, 1900s, if you were a descendant of slavery, which was very real at that time, you wanted to distance yourself from that because being a slave was not in vogue. And I think what I'd like to see in museums, and I literally don't know how you can change it, it's going to be a gradual thing, and it's not just, that image is not to be construed as representation of an entire people, it should be just one facet, just one example. And that you shouldn't have, okay, this is the era of this image of what Black women should be. Every Black woman counts. That's one of the things I'd like to see change. I'd like to see the narrative that, okay, this is just one of several images of the way women have been portrayed. It's not the only one, it's just one. And that way there isn't the pressure for women to feel that they must conform. When I think about that young woman, well, she's young compared to me, who actually gorilla glued her hair so that it would be perfectly laid down on her scalp, so that no hair would be out of place, so that she would look like she envisioned the world wanted to see her. I literally felt her pain. There's no reason why that should be an image that everyone should try to emulate. So yes, I'd like to see museums not elevate art and portraiture to a status that is the majority of people are unable to attain. Told you it was a big answer.
Thanks so much, Joe. I've been monitoring the chat, and I'm not going to read everything from the chat, but I'm seeing lots of comments about thinking about funding and pay in museums. So wanting to pay all interns and pay a living wage to all and reduce director pay, change the funding structure so museums are less dependent on philanthropy, use only paid educators to facilitate tours for school groups. We need to move away from a volunteer educator docent model. And jobs with benefits. So all too often jobs when teaching jobs are paid, they're often temporary, part-time, or contract jobs. So I see a hand from Wendy Wolf.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I think something I'm just thinking about is I feel it's maybe a little similar to what Alyssa is sharing, that as vaccines become available, more people are moving around and getting out and about. Just conversation of, oh, we can go back. Doesn't even matter what comes after that. I just think in so many ways, like this was this great moment that in an awful way made so many opportunities. And I had sort of such high hopes at some moments of the pandemic, so ironically, that it was creating space for real change in a variety of sectors, any sector that's in the chat. And I don't know, I just feel I'm sort of just struggling with conversations with colleagues and how to think, how do we move forward, or received an idea from a colleague and they said, well, I didn't know it was supposed to be nimble. And I just thought, but we're just still in this crazy space. Like, how do we just embrace the conditions that we've got and be there for a little bit and see what we can do with it? So I don't really know where to go from here, but I know that back is not where I want to end up. And maybe you all have some reflections to share of encouragement.
I'm just seeing Alyssa's kind of comment in the chat that the worst thing that museums can possibly do right now is just return to normal, whatever that is, and not try to fix what has been broken and unjust. I also, maybe following up on Wendy's question and comment, is I wanted to share a question that I think Kabir had posed as we were preparing for this program, which is when and how can we feel empowered to be driving change? It was really nice to hear from the authors that for some of you, it sounds like the process of writing the article helped you to feel empowered. I'm curious to hear from others about that. How can we feel empowered and when?
Can I say something? So I want to just say, so I'm Amanda Tobin. I work at Mass MoCA. I use she, her, and we filed with the labor board on Monday for our union. So thanks to Museum Workers Speak and other people who have amplified and supported so far. I have to say that Monday was the most powerful I think I've ever felt in my workplace, in a way that I'm sort of like, that feels weird and uncomfortable, but also really exciting. And of course, you know, the days since then, as we're still waiting to figure out how the museum will respond, but getting some glimpses and feeling very grateful. I work from home and I'm not going on campus right now, but I'm really so grateful to folks at the Philadelphia Museum of Art and Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, a new museum, who really helped us along this journey way over the summer, when we, you know, Massimo had a lot of layoffs and then rehired most of us, but not all of us. So we started organizing as soon as we were back at most, you know, almost capacity. So I want to say I'm really just grateful to my colleagues for coming together in this way. And I want to be a resource to other museums who might be interested in doing this, because I think it could really change what our field looks like in a good way.
Thanks so much, Amanda. And I want to call out, just for anyone who doesn't know, Amanda Tobin is also a Viewfinder author, and we'll drop the link to her article in the chat as well.
I think kind of similar to what Julian was sharing around like grassroots work. And I won't share too much because I don't want to overshare or misspeak, but you know, as I'm sure many of you have, on our museum's EDI committee, and to not share too many details, had a very bumpy start. And recently, I think we had what was a small win, but in the context of that bumpy road, felt like a breath, a release, where we were like finally afforded some agency that I think was lacking. I think it felt like a very top-down initiative at first, and it's finally, you know, feeling more grassroots. And I think it connects to the question of what we want to see change. I always get so like, I roll my eyes when I hear anything around like best practices, because I'm like, best practices. I'm tired of hearing about best practices, especially when they relate to EDI. I'm like, if we had best practices, these issues would not exist. So can we be more imaginative? Can we let go of the fear of trying something new? And I think, you know, I see small signs that maybe that is possible. I hope. I have to.
I would just second what Bernardo is saying about the feeling of like the lack of vulnerability that museums want to have in their spaces. That's the biggest thing I would like to see change. And I think there is something that most museums want to uphold that isn't really, well, it is spoken about a lot actually, but like their inability to really talk about class and how that really underpins a lot of the decision making in museums. And I think that is something that is really something that we're struggling with in America in general, is being able to name class as a structure that we are all not embarrassed millionaires, right? Like we're all going to be millionaires one day. And so we need to uphold these class structures as they're existing. And I think it kind of combines what was said earlier about, you know, unionizing and grassroots efforts of just acknowledging that museum workers are working class people, I think is a struggle. And I think that it's been a struggle in museums to just acknowledge that we are not perfect and we have to undo things. I think all of that makes a lot of leadership really nervous and scared to admit that they are vulnerable and that they don't have the answers and they don't know how to do things. Because I think there was this, I don't know how to really articulate this very well, but I feel like there's this weird exchange that happens between artists and the museum, where the artists can be messy and they can deal with difficult things and they can do all of that. And the museum is a space of structure, where nothing is messy and everything is clean and we figured it all out and everything has been labeled. And so we're the laboratory for the mess, but we organize the mess, right? We aren't the mess. So I think if I could change anything in a museum is to bring back the heart of like, no, we're people, we're messy, and we're vulnerable, and it's okay. And that is actually what people are interested in exploring when they come into museums. They don't want everything to be figured out. And how can we create spaces where people are interested in exploring the vulnerability of humanity, right? And that's, as educators, I think what drives us a lot is like, how can we help people work through those feelings and emotions when we're interrogating art and intersecting with art, and museums on a whole aren't there. Like other parts of the museum aren't there with wanting to get there, or at least in my experience, a lot of times that's the struggle between education departments and the majority of museum spaces.
Yeah, I'm seeing so much agreement in the chat.
And I was just going to say, do you want to write about that in an upcoming Viewfinder?
Would be so elated to do so. Sure.
So I think that might be a good note to end on. I know people are leaving to get to whatever next Zoom engagement they have. Kabir, do you want to just jump in and share ways to connect?
Yeah, so look out for our next issue in coming up in the next few weeks. And thank you, Julene. And we'll be, you should also look out for, if you follow the Museum Education Division social media, future calls for proposals for becoming an author or an editor in the future, as we're not at this moment in an active recruitment session for new editors, but we most likely will be shortly. So if either of those things are of interest to you, please look out for information and feel free to email any of us, Hallie, me. Also, I just want to thank our colleagues too, our co-editors who aren't on this session with us, Sierra Van Rick de Groot, Hannah Heller, and Daniela Fifi. So thanks to them who aren't here. Thank you so much to our authors who are here today. Thanks everyone so much for being here, and look forward, lots of great resources in the chat. You should be able to save the chat if you want to hold on to any of these links or resources.
And then I'll just jump in and say we'll have a second iteration of this peer-to-peer exploring the same topic, but with different authors on Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific time, 12 p.m. Eastern time.
And I think we do have a time change this weekend, right, everybody? Unless you're in Arizona, we don't play with that. But I just want to put my NAEA hat on again and say thanks to Kabir and Hallie for organizing today's panel and for everybody for participating. Again, shout out if you want to get your feet wet writing, Viewfinder is such a wonderful space to explore your ideas. So we'd love to hear from you. And with that, we'll see you all very soon. Take care.